President Biden standing by his decision to pull troops out of Afghanistan by next Tuesday, despite criticism from both sides of the aisle. Now it's unclear if the U.S. will be able to complete all of its evacuations in the 1 week before that deadline. Let's bring in ABC News political director Rick Klein, along with former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and Marine fighter pilot Colonel Steve Ganyard, an ABC News contributor. Rick, let's start with you. President Biden has been under a lot of pressure by G7 leaders to extend the withdrawal deadline, despite the Taliban saying that that would cross a red line. So what do you think is at stake here, and what do you think is behind President Biden's decision?
Well, he made a decision and he has been defending it, and he's now sticking with it in the face of enormous pressure from political rivals as well as some political friends in the Democratic Party who are saying there is no way that you'll get all Americans and Afghans associated with the American efforts out over the course of the next week. We heard military officials today concede they don't even know for sure how many Americans are in Afghanistan now, so there's no way they can really guarantee the safe evacuation of everyone inside this week time frame. Add to that the fact that the Taliban has now been saying that they want that August 31st deadline to stick, and it does appear like the Taliban is having some influence over the Biden decision-making. But it is his deadline. That is the White House position. That is what I expect the president to address later this afternoon, to say, this is my decision. I am sticking with it. He's going to do everything he can, and there's been enormous progress on that front in getting Americans and those aligned with Americans that have helped American efforts over the years out of the country safely. But this as bad as the last week was, you have the potential here for the next week to be even worse, and for Biden to be owning a lot of those consequences. It's an enormous risk, both politically and, of course, in terms of national security and American interests right now on the ground in danger.
Well, let's talk about that, Rick, with Steve. And Steve, you know, it's Biden's deadline, but now it's the Taliban's deadline, isn't it? I mean, they're calling the tune, it sounds like. And just give us your sense right now, in the midst of this chaos, where we stand. The operation now moving at a very good clip, it seems like, 10,000, 15,000 plus getting out per day. But where are we, and how do you see this deadline?
Yeah, Terry, it is kind of sad that the world's greatest military is taking its direction from an insurgency that has nothing more than rifles and RPGs. But that's the way it's going to have to end up. I think that the administration is doing a good job in getting out those people that can be gotten out. I think that it'll come down to the wire, but I do think that most of the U.S. Citizens and the Afghans who have been helping the U.S. will have a chance to get out of the country. But that sort of points out, we saw the Taliban today say, please do not leave the country. Why? Because the Afghan economy will likely collapse within weeks. They're going to have capital cut off. Most banks will stop lending. The IMF will stop giving them lines of credit. And the billions of dollars that the U.S. pumps into that economy are going to go away. And the people that are trying to escape now make up much of the middle class. And every society needs a healthy middle class. If that middle class leaves, the only thing the Taliban's going to have is being able to sell heroin, which in a good year is about $1 billion a year on an $8 billion economy. So the Taliban risks the collapse of the economy and what all that comes with it. So today we see them saying, no, please don't leave. We need you people who are educated professional class.
And Rick, Republican lawmakers today called President Biden's response to the crisis in Afghanistan an unmitigated disaster, saying it's clear that he's not listening to anybody about the situation there, and it's damaging the United States' credibility around the world. What do you think? Is Biden's response to Afghanistan, or lack thereof, going to impact his reputation when it comes to foreign policy?
He owns this. The nation owns this. And he can talk about the agreement that was negotiated by his predecessor. He can talk about how 4 American presidents have presided over this war. And as he'll say likely again today, he doesn't want to leave it to a 5th. That's all fine as well as the argument goes. But it means weathering a whole barrage of criticism, again, not just from Republicans. There are many Democrats who have been involved in these closed-door briefings from military officials who don't like the answers that they have heard. The best they'll say sometimes is, I hope that the private answers that they're able to act on are different than what they're telling us in these briefings, because they don't feel like there's enough of a plan in place, even for all of the work that's been done over the past week to get American interests out of there. And you're right, in terms of the standing on the world stage, there's no way that you don't factor this in terms of how America moves forward. This appears to have been a lost war, a lost cause, and it leaves with U.S. interests leaving under very uncertain and very perilous circumstances, as Steve Ganyard said a moment ago, having to abide essentially by deadlines deadlines that are being set by people that are kind of a ragtag group. This is not the way you'd expect it to work. It's not the way that Biden would have forecasted it to have worked, but it's a decision that he has made and that he is going to own for the remainder of his presidency and beyond.
Well, Steve, let me pick up on that with you. Look, it's humiliating, really, what's happening. These scenes, this chaos, this pain that Americans have at the inability to get our allies, people who've soldiered with us and stood by us and tried to open up clinics and do the work of building a new Afghanistan. We're going to leave some behind for sure. How do you read the strategic impact for U.S. interests around the world of what is unfolding in Kabul and what it says about us?
Yeah, I think that's the interesting point. Right now, Terry, we know what's going to happen between now and the 31st. The U.S. will do its best to get everybody out. All the other allied nations will get their people out. But on 1 September, a new chapter begins for Afghanistan, and every vacuum gets filled. And when the U.S. pulls out, there are lots of regional players that are going to want to come in. So you're going to have Iran, who has interest there. You'll have Pakistan, who's been working with the Taliban, the Haqqani network, and al-Qaeda behind our backs, playing a double game with the U.S. for decades. And you're going to have countries like China and Russia. Why China? Because the U.S., about a decade ago, proved that there's about $1 trillion worth of minerals in Afghanistan that are extractable. The Chinese would love to get their hands on that. Now, how does that tie into terror and what interests the U.S. may have? Well, countries like Iran and China and Russia have in the past used surrogates or allowed terrorists to operate from their territory as a way to get at the United States. So terrorism caused by Islamic extremism in the past few years has died down quite a bit, but it would be very convenient. It would be a win-win for a country like China or Iran to be able to get at those minerals and be able to harbor a small group of terrorists that could distract the U.S. from other problems in the South Pacific.
So those are high potential costs. The president says, look, it's time to end this forever war, and the American people agree with him. 70% support the idea of getting out. But how? The president also said just a few weeks ago, under no circumstances would you see helicopters taking people out of the embassy. Of course, that is what we've seen. But was there a better way? Let me draw on your experience as an officer and an official in the government. What could this have been done better, and how?
I don't know that it could have, Terry. You think about when the Russians pulled out, and what was it, 96? I can't remember exactly. But when the Russians pulled out, they had a land bridge, and they actually withdrew in a very deliberate way, in a very dignified way, and they drove home. The U.S. is landlocked here, so there's no seaports. There's no way that the U.S. can drive home. So everything has to come to the airport, which means that you have this shrinking circle as you get to the airport, and eventually you're going to have the last soldier Marine pull up the ladder on one of those C-17s and say, we're out of here. So it could have never really been a clean break, because once everyone saw that the U.S. was serious about pulling out, then people sort of threw in the towel and said, well, we can't stand up to the Taliban, so we might as well surrender. And then we saw the Taliban very, very quickly take over when that moral defeat came. That was the real key in my mind, is that the Afghan army saw the moral defeat when the U.S. said, that's it, we really are done this time, and we're pulling out. And the Afghan army just basically collapsed. By the way, Terry, there's no punishment in the Afghan army for desertion. Most armies in the U.S. included, you can be punishable by death. But in Afghanistan, it's just a job, and you can hang up your rifle and go back to the fields if you feel like it.
And Steve, the Taliban says they're no longer allowing Afghans past their checkpoints into the airport. So, those roads look to be closed to Afghans. Is there any option at this point for the U.S., maybe special forces or helicopter flights into the city and beyond to get those people out?
Yeah, the Taliban's been allowing that. Obviously the U.S., we know that the Brits, the French, the Emiratis have special ops folks working outside the wire to bring people quietly in. There's a fairly elaborate system of calling AMSITs and telling them how to get into the inside the airport compound. So things are getting smoother. The airlift itself is getting smoother. people are not being turned away, airplanes are not being turned away. So there's this constant flow of airplanes out of Kabul to places like the Persian Gulf so that they can be flown on, or to Germany so that they can be flown on to the U.S. and other countries. So it seems like the evacuation is getting smoother, it's getting better. But as time goes on, it's you're going to run out of people, and finally you're going to have to close that circle, pull up the ladder, and the U.S. will be done, at least for the time being, with the Afghanistan misadventure.
And Rick, of course, the White House also needs to stay focused on its domestic agenda. The House is voting to advance the bipartisan infrastructure package and the Democrats' $3.5 trillion budget resolution after that standoff with moderate Democrats. So what do you think, Rick? Democrats need all the votes they can get. Are the bills still on track, even with this distraction having to deal with Afghanistan?
Yeah, Kira, 2 points I'd make. One is that they are on track, but under the most perilous circumstances. This is supposed to be the easy part, just getting agreement on the broad framework. The tough votes are actually going to be more than a month away as the individual items that are part of these budget agreement come into view. And the second point I'd make is that while these things on their face are not the same, we're talking about domestic priorities versus foreign policy, politically they are very much linked, because the whole rationale for Democrats moving together has been based on the idea of a relatively popular president pushing relatively popular policies. That has been upended over the course of the last week. That's part of the toll of the decision that President Biden made regarding Afghanistan, is that we now have a very unpopular and, as Terry said, humiliating episode that is definitely already had an impact on the approval rating of President Biden. So he needs this to keep some political relevance. He needs this to advance the major portions of his agenda. It appears like House Democrats are back on track to at least get that going again, but the road to actually signing it into law has never looked more difficult, and now the decreased or the diminishing political capital of the White House becomes a major factor.
Rick Klein, Colonel Steve Ganyard, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kara.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.